Got to spend some time with some other pastors. Just a great experience. And one of the things you noticed right away about Ethiopia was incredible. I know at different points in my life, I thought, you think Ethiopia, you think maybe a poorer country, you think of just not a lot of opportunity. It's really an international hub. I mean, we experienced all kinds of different people groups there. It's really a laid-back culture. So it was interesting. The moment I got off the plane, experienced a different dynamic. I went from a pretty laid-back culture to experiencing in the culture there in the airport, got a this like in-your-face glimpse of just how different the DRC was. The Congolese people, they're very intense, and when they communicate, they're very verbal. And so you think they might be fighting. I mean, I thought there were fights going on all over the airport. They're just intense, and they're in your face, and their hands are moving, and you think, man, there's a fight ready to break out. And then all of a sudden, a smile comes to their face, and they shake hands, or they fist bump, or whatever, and they walk away. It's just interesting, that dynamic. How many know that there are ways, certain ways in which we communicate that really emphasize importance or a sense of urgency or a sense of, hey, this is really important to me? How many understand that? There are certain ways that we communicate in our culture. I was thinking of a few. One is passion. Right? If you are a passionate person and it comes out in something you do or how you communicate or your intensity. I know those of you that know me know that I'm a pretty laid-back person, but there's some pretty intense parts of my life. And if I'm passionate about something, there can be this intensity that comes out. And so if there's an intensity there, it's because I'm passionate about it, right? It's important to me. There's a sense of urgency there. If you think about not only that, but you think about a raised voice. If you're a parent here today and your kids are a little bit older and they're 16 and you're in the passenger seat and they're driving with you, and the first time you say stop and they don't stop, and so you raise your voice a little bit, right? Stop. And then they don't stop, so you raise it again, and all of a sudden your laid-back dad is getting a little bit intense in the car. And if you ask my kids, they don't always know what to do with dad because they're used to him a certain way, and then, it gets a little bit intense, and so that's kind of an eye-opener for them. But anyways, if you're a parent, you understand the urgency. Another way is the frequent use of a particular word or phrase or idea, right? If you want to get something across, you communicate it often. With our family, when we would go into, we don't do it so much anymore because they're older now, but we would emphasize things often when they were littler. When we were going into a store, we would communicate what our expectations are. We don't want you touching everything. We don't want you acting like hyenas. We don't want you to act like human beings. And so they got used to hearing that, but they knew over the course of time that is important to us because that is something we emphasized again and again. So let's see if we can pick up the sense of seriousness or urgency in Paul's. You'll find here that Paul uses this idea, this phraseology, several different times in his epistles. In connecting this idea that there are certain expectations, that there is certain understanding, a certain way of living that is to be attached with the idea of being a Christian. That if you and I are followers of Jesus, Paul emphasized in several different places that there is an expectation attached to that. I have one of those. It's found in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 1. I'll read it there. It says, Ephesians 4:1, "Therefore I, the prisoner of the Lord, implore you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling in which you were called." Do you understand today that if you're here and you're within the shout of my voice, you need to know and understand that you have a calling, as Danielle said, a sense of purpose. This is not just for the Apostle Paul, not just for a pastor or a leader or somebody else. It's for anybody who follows Jesus. You have a calling on your life. And Paul, several different times, employed the church, exhorted them, encouraged them to understand that there is a certain expectation attached to being a follower of Jesus. That there's a certain way of living that is attached to that. Philippians 1:27. You'll notice this again. Joey, go ahead and put that one up. Philippians 1:27. "Only you conduct yourselves," there we go, "in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or remain absent, I will hear of you that you are standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel. Only conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the calling. Colossians 1:10, so that you will walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, to please him in all respects, bearing fruit in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God. You'll find the same idea communicated in 1 Thessalonians 2:12, 2 Thessalonians 1:5, and then in 2 Thessalonians 1:11. So you'll find that this must have been important to Paul, right? He emphasized it to the church in Colossae, to the church in Philippi, to the church in Thessalonica. And so he wanted to communicate this idea, again, that there's expectation, that there's a manner of living, of walking that is associated with being a follower of Jesus. So I think I can say with some authority and confidence that Paul felt strongly about saying that you and I are to be different. So in the next 4 weeks, we're going to talk about what it looks like to be different from Ephesians chapter 5. We're going to draw from Ephesians chapter 5 and talk about a different walk. We're going to talk about that this morning. We're going to talk about a different perspective. We're going to talk about a different focus and then a different longing and what that means. So if you have your Bibles, would you open up to Ephesians chapter 5, and we're just going to read verses 15 through 18. Are you there? Working on it? I'm almost there. All right, Ephesians 5, verse 15. The whole book of Ephesians is just a great book to read. But starting in verse 15, Paul there in speaking to the church said, "Therefore, be careful how you walk, not as unwise men, but as wise, making the most of your time, because the days are evil. So then, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. And do not get drunk with wine, for that is dissipation, but instead be filled with the Holy Spirit." Now, if you have kids or have had kids at one point, and they, if they're into Legos, I don't know if you've experienced this, but Legos tend to end up on the floor. And if you've ever walked into a dark room in the middle of the night, it's more likely that you've encountered a Lego. And if you've ever stepped on a Lego in the middle of the night with bare feet, how many know it hurts? It's painful. You do that a couple times, and it will change how you walk into your kids' room. We have a puppy, and took him outside, and I was playing with him and trying to bribe him to get him to come in with me, and so I got him a little, a stick about this thick and about this long, and so I just brought it in, didn't think anything of it, and so he took it inside and maybe chewed on it for a while. But the other day I found that stick. I was chasing him around the living room, and I went up to the couch, and I stepped right on that, and ouch, felt that. Again, you experience something like that, and it'll change how you walk. Paul says in verse 15, to be careful how you walk. Not as unwise, but as wise. Author and pastor Andy Stanley, he suggests that the best question ever that you and I should ask is connected to verse 15. And before I get to that question, consider first the filter that when you and I make decisions in life, we often approach life with certain filters. And here's a pretty common filter that I hear all the time. And so when it comes to making decisions, we often think when it comes to what will I do, when it comes to a change in job or a change in course or education or friendship or dating relationship, I often think, or we find this in the world, what is it that will make me happy? And we understand that is often just a filter that is presented in the world. It's everywhere. If you watch any kind of TV, it's all about, you read anything, it's all about do what you want to do as long as it makes you feel happy. So when you're facing a particular decision, when you have a choice in front of you, if it makes you happy, do it. Who cares about the consequences, right? As long as it makes you feel happy in the moment. I mean, it may not make you feel happy down the road, but as long as it makes you feel happy right now, do it. So that's a pretty common filter that people use when making decisions. That's a pretty common one. So you think about it. You're facing a big decision. You're discontent with your job. If you're unsure of a relationship, if you're confused about a certain direction, you ask the question and filter it through the lens of, will it make me happy? The next one is one that I don't think is talked about as much, but it's definitely one that's in the brain, right? It's in us, and it's often a filter we use, and that's the filter of, will it make me feel good? So will it make me happy? And then very close to that is, how will choosing this particular direction or whatever, when facing a certain decision, we often use that filter, will it make me feel good? And how many know that if you use that as a filter when making decisions, that can be a filter that can get you in trouble if you use it all the time, right? Will it make me feel good? There's still two other filters that I want to point out. And what about this filter? What about the filter of not seeing anything wrong with a particular decision? So maybe you've been faced with a particular decision. You think, well, there's nothing wrong with this decision. I can't see any holes in it. I don't see any evil that's going to come about as a result of it. And so we can use that as a filter as well. And so we make a decision based on that. What we can wrongly assume is that if we are unable to determine anything wrong with a particular decision, that it must be okay. And how many know that just because a decision's okay doesn't mean that it's a decision that you should make? All right, come on, how many have experienced that? You might look at something and think, that's okay to do. And then you step out and you make that decision and you find out down the road, man, I probably shouldn't have made that decision. And then the last one is the filter of, how close can I get to the line between right and wrong without crossing over? I mean, no. I don't know. You might be somebody who tends to come up to that line, and then you like to flirt with that line and have that adventure or sense of adrenaline rush or whatever that's associated with that. If you think about it, anybody who's been on a diet has probably thought about that. How close can I get without crossing the line, right? Or what about the, I was thinking there's probably not a guy who's not thought about that question at some point in his dating career, right? Probably most of us have thought about that. How close can I get to the line without going too far? And I remember as a youth pastor, that was one of the things that kids love to bring out, how far can I go without crossing that line? Or what about the person who wants to get ahead, who wants to get an advantage in life or in business or in finances, get a leg up on another person? They've probably asked that question, how close can I get? How much integrity do I need to have in this situation before I cross the line and do something damaging to my career or to another person? If we're not careful, you and I can find ourselves in the situation like Dre and Ruby did in Blackish when they were experiencing some marriage difficulties, and on his way out, Dre, as he's closing the door, he turns to his wife as he's going to find somewhere else to live for a short period of time, where he says, how did we get ourselves in this place? And if we're not aware of the filter that we use when making decisions, we can find ourselves in that place. How did I get here? And then it can move from how did I get here to how do I keep making the same bad decisions over and over again? Have you ever asked yourself that question? How did I get here? What if Paul's words here found a way into the space of our minds and became a filter for the decisions that we will make in life? I have to ask, what would it look like if these words stuck more in our minds? I know one thing for sure, we would ask ourselves less, how did we get here? Andy Stanley, in his book, he talks about a man by the name of Frank, and Frank, he said, was one of the smartest people that he knew. But as he listen to Frank for 45 minutes just unravel the mess that his life was in. He was going through bankruptcy, ugly divorce, a custody battle, sexual addiction. I mean, just a number of different things going on all at the same time. And as he began to explain and unravel this mess, it became very apparent to Andy, Pastor Anley, that this man's life would have been much different if he had used a principle, the principle found here in Ephesians chapter 5 when making decisions. Paul again says, do not live as unwise, but he said, live as wise people. Be careful how you walk. So what if there's a way that we can be careful in the decisions that we make? What if there is a way to live different? What if there is a different way to filter our decisions? Again, the world says, filter it through what makes you happy, what makes you feel good, how close you can get. But what if we used a different filter? What if we begin asking ourselves different questions and begin to ask ourselves the right question? So what should we be asking? We should be asking this question. It's the question, what is the wise thing to do? Not what will make me happy. Not what will make me feel good. Not how close I can get to the line. Not what's going to get me ahead. But what is the wise thing for me to do? So this is the question that takes into account our walk. And so if you and I want to be careful in how we walk and how we live out our calling as followers of Jesus, then that's a question we should be asking. What is the wise thing to do? So it's the question that sets us up to live differently. And what are we called? We're called to live differently. And if you want to live differently, then you have to make decisions differently. I have to make decisions differently. We have to make decisions differently. So what if that became the filter of every decision that we made? What is the wise thing for me to do? If we're going to be careful of how we walk moving forward, there are three things that we're going to need. And the first thing is this. Number one, we're going to need a healthy perspective of the past. You and I are going to need a healthy perspective of the past. When you think about your life and you look in the proverbial rearview mirror, do you cringe? Do you see ghosts? Do you get anxious? What happens when you look in the rearview mirror of your life and you look back and you see your past? And the reality is we all have a past. We all have a history. And in that history, in that past, there are good decisions, and there's lots of good decisions, hopefully, and then there's bad decisions and bad turns and things that have not gone the way we hoped they would go. Come on, how many know? That's just the reality of life and being human. Right? There are things that we're not so excited about that fill our past. There are things that we want to run from that probably make us cringe. There's things that we probably wish that we could do differently. The difference, though, between those who cringe and those who don't is the wise people have learned or have made it a habit of learning from their mistakes. The difference between cringing and not cringing as we look at our history is that reality. Have we learned from our past? Have we learned from our past mistakes, our past failures, those bad decisions? Or do we keep making the same ones, living in insanity, hoping that our life will somehow turn out differently, even though we make the same decisions over and over again? Right? That's the definition of insanity. Doing the same thing and expecting different results. A poet by the name of George Santana once said, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." Our history, our addictive behaviors, the baggage we bring into relationships, our ways of responding to stressful relationships, our familial upbringing, our personal tendencies, Each of these give us a rear view advantage. And I guess if I can encourage you here today is for us to be able to look at those and see those things in a positive light and to see those things as an actual advantage to when we have to make decisions again. It becomes an advantage if we will ask ourselves the question based on those tendencies, based on our history, what is the wise thing to do? Remember your past so you don't have to repeat it. So based on the history, based on the past, what is the wise thing to do if all our relationships tend to turn out in a certain way? How many know what I'm talking about? If we tend to go into relationships and after a certain amount of time they go wrong and they go foul and they take a bad turn, maybe it would be a good idea for us to take a step back based on that reality, based on that past, that history, and ask ourselves in view of where we're at, in view of our past, what is the wise thing to do? What is the wise thing to do? Jump into another relationship? Maybe not. Maybe it would be a good idea to slow down and to back away and say, hey, maybe I need to look at this a little bit differently. Maybe there's something I need to learn. If we're heading into a marriage covenant relationship with a lot of familial baggage dysfunction, premarital counseling is great. But the wise thing to do is probably say, you know what? That'd probably be a good idea if I continued counseling after marriage. See, a lot of people go into a marriage relationship, they don't get the upfront counseling, and then they don't continue it, and then they wonder why things are so bad in their relationship. So maybe the wise thing to do would be, okay, what could I do in this situation that would help my marriage be successful? If we find that certain people bring us down, if we find that certain people tend to bring us into their level of character or into their way of thinking and behaving, wisdom would say that I could learn from that. If there are examples of that in my past, what is the wise thing to do? Maybe I need to surround myself with different kinds of people. Well, if I just find myself attracted to and kind of being drawn to a particular kind of person, what would happen if you were intentional to realize that and then to figure out what the wise thing to do would be to, okay, maybe I need to surround myself with some different kinds of people. If we have a particular weakness towards something, the wise thing to do then is, if I have done that in the past, the wise thing to do then in the future is to know that there are certain places and certain things that I just need to stay clear of for the sake of not making those decisions again. So be wise, use your advantage, acknowledge what you see, and ask yourself the right question: what is the right thing to do? So, number one, a healthy perspective of the past is good, and it gives us this advantage moving forward. Can I ask you this, are you using that advantage? See, we don't often think of our past and look at it in that way, do we? But it's an advantage. So don't repeat the same thing. Number two, a feel for what is right. Or not for what is right, a feel for what is, sorry. So if I'm going to be careful in how I live out my life, it'd be great if you and I could have a feel for what is. And basically what this is this speaks to the current reality of the current circumstances I find myself in. How many understand that you and I, we go through highs and lows, and we go through seasons of life, and not every season is the same. I had a friend a few years ago who went through a horrible divorce, and I know there are people in here who have experienced very deep, dramatic pain. And we know that when you're in it, it's hard to see anything else. And so this pain just consumed him, and he would just cry on the phone and just weep, and he would text all the time, and for that part and that season of his life, it was horrible. And one of the things he'd always say to me is, he said, I would never wish what I'm feeling on my worst enemy. said, I wouldn't wish it on the devil. That was his perspective. But he couldn't see anything else. All he felt was in this moment that this is what life was going to be like for the remainder of his days. Now that person's gone through some other hard things, but I will tell you that was a season and a part of his life that was very painful, but he doesn't live in that place anymore. He has experienced some healing, and he has come out of that, and he has experienced joy again and freedom again, and some of those things. So it's important for you and I to realize just the circumstances, the reality of what is. It's a good idea to have a grasp of what that looks like. Life is full of seasons. In Psalm 30, the psalmist writes in verse 10 and 11, it says, "Hear, O Lord, and be gracious to me. O Lord, be my helper. You have turned for me my mourning into dancing." Right? And so if you are in a season of grieving, of mourning, don't hurry that season, but understand that there's another season. It's coming. It's around the corner. Wisdom says, live in light of my circumstances. Wisdom says this, let me back up here. Wisdom says, in light of my circumstances, what is the wise thing to do? So if I am in a hard season of life, and maybe you've been given this advice, one of the best advice you could give yourself or to another person is, if you're in a very hard season of life, is don't make any major decisions in that season. Right? Don't make any major decisions. That's what wisdom would say. If I am angry, if I'm angry at another person, or if I read tone into an email or text, I've been there. I've done that, and I've responded out of that. How do you know that when you respond out of that, just kind of, even if there wasn't something there, all of a sudden it's a bigger deal now. And then you have another problem a bigger problem that you have to figure out how to deal with. And that's some of the best advice my wife still tries to give me, is wait on that email. I'm like, no, I got to get it out right now. They need to know my side. It's like, wait. And then when you hit send, it's like, as soon as you hit send and you didn't wait, it's like all that regret and all that, oh man, I just made a bad decision, didn't I? It just comes riding, to the surface. And I'm like, oh, when will I learn? What'd you say? Someday hopefully, right? Keep praying for me. I mean, sometimes taking a step back that it helps in removing a emotional reactionary response. And that's what wisdom says. Take a step back. Think about it. Allow the emotion to kind of come out before you respond. And so again, this is where most of us get in trouble. It's in that emotional reactionary response. If you're going through a divorce or something hard and you're on the other side of it now, take time. Don't necessarily jump into another relationship, right? Give it time. If you're going through something hard, again, don't make any big decisions. If you're in over your head in debt and you feel that weight and feel that pressure, wisdom would say, in light of where my current circumstances are, don't take on more debt. Don't open up more, credit card accounts. You're already feeling the weight and the pressure of what is, so don't add to it. That's what wisdom would say. What may have been good for yesterday may not be good today. What may have been helpful yesterday may not be helpful today. What was hard yesterday, may be easy today. And so understand your circumstances, and in light of those circumstances, ask what is the wise thing to do. And then number 3, it's also a good idea, if we want to be careful of how we walk, it's a good idea to have an idea for the future. Have an idea for the future. Have a goal. Have a dream. Have something out there that gives you vision, that gives you something to look forward to. So let me ask here today, what does your preferred future look like? You care about your future? You care about a particular vision, goal, or dream? Wisdom would say, make decisions with that in mind. Don't lose sight of what's in front of you. Don't short-sight yourself. Don't sabotage. And this is a word I feel like in my spirit for some of us here today. We have sabotaged our future. We have sabotaged things that we've seen in our future. We've cut ourselves short by not making the wise decision. We've settled, or we maybe looked at what is going to make me feel good in the moment, and because of that, we pull the carpet out. Maybe from a vision, from a dream, from something that's in front of us. Can I encourage us here today? Don't sabotage yourself. Don't cut your dream or your vision or that idea, that hope short. Don't sabotage the opportunity to walk out what you see with unwise decisions. And the scripture that comes to mind here is this. It's Galatians 6:7. It says, in some translations, it says, God cannot be deceived. Others say God cannot be mocked. What a man sows is what he will reap. You and I cannot sow unwise decisions and think that we're not going to reap from those unwise decisions. We cannot make unwise decisions and hope that everything we see will become a reality if in the process we're sabotaging what we see, that idea in front of us, with unwise decisions. So wisdom says, with vision for the future, what is the wise thing to do? So, you have the rearview mirror. In light of what's in the past, what is the wise thing to do? We have this understanding of what is, where you and I are at, the season of life, what is the wise thing to do? And then with an idea, with a vision, with something in front of us, what is the wise thing to do? If you and I will learn to frame our decisions with that in mind, I think it will save us a lot of hardship. Paul said, be careful how you live. Live not as unwise, but as wise people.